Well, since the onset of the banking crisis in 2007, 2008, there have been lots of questions asked about banks, not least the governance of some of the large banks that failed. Were they run appropriately? And also, did they conduct their business in an ethical and appropriate manner? These issues were brought to bear primarily because in an analysis of the causes of the major bank failure was the insight that many banks took on excessive risks. The banks were incentivized to take on excessive risks because the senior executives of the banks were rewarded substantially if they took on risks. Also, shareholders benefited very much from excessive risk-taking banks by being rewarded with higher stock prices and greater returns, where the downside, in fact, from this excessive risk-taking was the big banks were bailed out by the state. So it was the government, the taxpayer, the ordinary individual who paid for support of the banking system and for the excesses that had happened in the run-up to the crisis. So nowadays there is much greater interest and discussion with regards to the ethical behaviour of bankers, the ethical behaviour of the people who run banks, and the behaviour the way in which banks are governed. Now, how these discussions on ethical behaviour been manifest? Well, first of all, there's been widespread reform introduced to try and ensure better governance of banks. This relates to more appropriate rules and regulations with regards to the structure of boards and the role of the senior executive officers. Also, as we speak, there are restrictions being implemented throughout Europe and limiting executive pay to try and minimise their incentive to take on excessive risk. And also, more broadly, one's seen a widespread growth in an array of professional training courses and banks signing up to a whole range of industry initiatives aimed at improving the ethical behaviour of bankers. In fact, our university, for instance, we run a programme with the Chartered Institute of Bankers from Scotland, and they insist that anybody doing their programme has to, if they want to be a professional banker, have to do a ethics in banking course. And certainly from the highest level in the banking sector, the regulators and also the senior bankers nowadays make a big amount of noise about how they're monitoring all their activities and trying to ensure that they're being fair and honest and trustworthy in their business. Now that all sounds very good, but still policy makers and the general public and the media still remain very sceptical as to whether bankers have learnt their lessons and have changed the way some of them behave to become more ethical in their business practice. And a lot of this has got to do with the ongoing scandals being reported about the banks fixing prices and the various reference rates, like the LIBOR rate, which is a reference interbank rate on which trillions of dollars of financial transactions are priced. There's allegations of price fixing in the foreign exchange market, which I think is the largest market in the world, and that's fixing a benchmark rate that's fixed every day at 4 o'clock. There's allegations there. There's allegations about fixing gold and a whole range of commodity price benchmarks on which trillions of dollars of other transactions are priced. So the problem now for the banking sector is they are making the right noises, and the regulators are saying they're operating in a more ethical way, and they've improved ethical standards, and they're introducing controls to ensure that bad practice doesn't take place. But still there's this ongoing release of bad information about the banks and how parts of banks engaged in unethical, bordering on fraudulent, and in some cases fraudulent activity to rip off their customers. So it still remains to be seen whether certainly many of the world's largest banks can wipe the slate clean and create an ethical business model that customers as well as policymakers as well as the media believe in.